The Salazar regime.
If you've ever been to Portugal, you've likely come across the name Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, the man behind a system known for its paradoxes, repression and authoritarianism on one side, but economic stability and order on the other. A simple, conservative society, tranquil yet shadowed by fear, isolated from the chaos of the Second World War, but equally distanced from the progress sweeping through Europe. This is Portugal under Salazar, a world of quiet streets, the unspoken weight of an iron grip. As the sun set on Portugal in the early 20th century, the nation was in turmoil. The collapse of the monarchy in 1910 had ushered in the First Portuguese Republic, a period marked by political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest. Over the span of 16 chaotic years, Portugal saw 45 governments rise and fall, each more fragile than the last. Amid this turmoil, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar emerged, a professor of economics with a reputation for discipline and integrity. Salazar was first appointed as the Minister of Finance in 1928, under the military dictatorship that had seized power 2 years earlier. Within months, his meticulous reforms brought a semblance of stability to Portugal's battered finances. Salazar balanced the national budget, curbed inflation, and brought the deficit under control, earning him a reputation as a savior in the eyes of many. Following this success, in 1932, Salazar was appointed Prime Minister, cementing his hold on power. He built the Estado Novo, or New State, an authoritarian regime rooted in conservative Catholic values, nationalism, and corporatism. This system promised order and stability, a stark contrast to the chaos of the preceding republic. For many Portuguese, Salazar was a hero, a figure who restored dignity and discipline to the nation. Farmers, laborers, and even intellectuals, weary of instability, saw him as a symbol of moral rectitude and competence.
Okay, so an authoritarian regime is a political system where power is concentrated in a single leader or small group, suppressing political pluralism, civil liberties like free speech, and democratic processes to maintain control, often through repression, propaganda, and controlling information, even while sometimes maintaining the appearance of democracy.
But not everyone shared this admiration. While some praised Salazar's economic achievements, others decried the suppression of civil liberties, censorship, and political oppression that came with his regime. The so-called tranquility was maintained through strict surveillance and the silencing of dissent. Fernando Pessoa, the prominent Portuguese writer and poet, wrote, "What is wrong is not that Oliveira Salazar is Minister of Finance, which I accept is right, but that he is Minister of everything, which is more questionable." But what was life really like for the ordinary Portuguese citizen under Salazar? The Estado Novo emphasized conservative values, family, church, and hard work. Salazar's Portugal was a rural society where small
So they're conservatives. Remember that.
villages were the heart of everyday life. Many Portuguese woke to the sound of church bells, worked long hours in the fields, and ended their days around the dinner table with their families. The regime encouraged this simplicity, promoting the idea that Portugal's greatness lay in its traditions. Through schools and propaganda, the Estado Novo instilled a deep respect for authority, religion, and national pride. One of Salazar's most striking contributions was his advocacy of living normally, that his people should live exclusively by preserving and reproducing the shared habits and values handed down by previous generations. Children recited patriotic songs in classrooms, and posters with Salazar's image reminded citizens of the virtues of obedience and discipline. Yet beneath this veneer of tranquility lay a different reality. The government controlled nearly every aspect of life. Newspapers, radio, and cinema were censored to ensure only acceptable messages reached the public. The Ministry of Propaganda ensured that all cultural output aligned with the regime's ideals, fostering obedience and silencing opposition. Under the Salazarian regime, women were confined to traditional roles of homemakers and mothers, with limited civil rights and economic independence. However, the reality of economic necessity led many women to work in various sectors, challenging the regime's ideal of the submissive domestic woman. Dissenting voices, whether from political opponents, intellectuals, or even everyday citizens, were swiftly silenced. The secret police, PD, operated in the shadows, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. The PD police was responsible for suppressing political opposition and used widespread surveillance, torture, imprisonment, and even executions to maintain control. For many, life became a delicate balancing act. Conversations were cautious and trust was scarce. Neighbors avoided controversial topics, and even the walls seemed to have ears. Economically, while Salazar's policies brought stability, they also perpetuated poverty. Urban centers like Lisbon and Porto grew, but most of the country remained isolated and underdeveloped. In the countryside, the corporatist organization created a network of multi-purpose community centers offering social services, education, and leisure inspired by the fascist Topolevoro model. These centers provided cultural activities like libraries, cinema, folk music, theatre, and sports, with a focus on folklore groups to promote national traditions and social conformity. During Portugal's colonial was from 1961 to 1974, many young men were conscripted to fight in distant territories like Angola and Mozambique, leaving behind their families for years, often serving multiple 3-year tours. Meanwhile, countless Portuguese intellectuals, students, and political dissidents sought exile in democratic European countries such as France, the UK, and Sweden. These exiles not only escaped the regime's repression, but also formed opposition movements, raising international awareness of Salazar's authoritarian rule and lobbying European governments to condemn his regime. By the early 1970s, it stood as one of the last remaining authoritarian regimes in Western Europe, with the Iberian Peninsula widely viewed as a politically repressive and backward region, in sharp contrast to the progressive trajectory of Northern and Western Europe. Daily life under Salazar was a paradox, orderly yet oppressive, tranquil yet filled with an undercurrent of unease. For some, it was a peaceful existence. For others, it meant quiet submission under an authoritarian regime.
Yeah, and the Salazar regime, Estado Novo, is often, it goes unspoken for many people, many nations, and I think it's a very important part of history that needs to be identified and taught just as much as fascism growing up, but I learned about everything else. And when we look at Estado Novo, you can see how the state managed labor. You can see how corporations were protected. You can see how the church gave moral cover and colonies were treated as economic trusts. And you can see how people were governed as wards, not heirs. Now ask yourself, doesn't this sound familiar? When looking at the United States of America as a corporate state without the name, it might not have a dictator, but it has a president with boards and agencies. It has two parties managed under one ideology, which is the United States as a corporate entity, right? It's all about managing the corporate anyways. The colonies are trust populations, you can see, and we'll get into the Indian trust in this conversation because it's relevant to this conversation. And you see forced labor, prisons, debt, benefits, contracts, convict leasing, even. So that is not separate from how Estado Novo operated in Portugal. The state still manages labor. People are still governed as wards. Colonies are still economic trusts. Look at what's happening across the waters, you know? These are still American entities. And what gives it all a moral cover? It doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's the Roman Catholic Church, right? I know that the majority of people in the Supreme Court identify as Catholics, although they say that religion cannot govern. There's still an underlining entity or ideology and practice that operates through government. And so when you look at the Department of Interior plus trust law, you can see Portuguese colonial logic, British imperial trust law, and American administrative law, and how they all merge in order to classify, manage, and account for people. And it hasn't changed. Let's see if we can get into another video here because I want to provide as much context as possible, but I don't think we need to get into the very long documentaries as you get it. It's not hard, but I think people need to take accountability for what they worship, what they believe in, and what they give their attention to. Is this the historian again? Yeah, we don't need to do that. Let's do a little bit of no, let's not do that guy. I don't even need these videos. I just don't want to get copyright stricken, you know? Which is kind of hard. Like some of these history videos, channels, like Hezekiah News, for example. Let's not get into that. That's drama. Like Hezekiah News copyrights all their videos, so I'm not trying to, step on any toes. I can just keep talking about it. But I hope that that first video did give you enough background information. Let's do this one then. It's shorter.
In the complex tapestry of 20th century Portugal, Antonio Salazar emerged as a formidable dictator. Amid political turbulence, he established the authoritarian Estado Novo, perpetuating suppression through a ruthless secret police. Despite achieving limited economic prosperity, his policies fell short in promoting substantial modernization. The population experienced suppression, leading to a notable absence of democracy and individual liberties. Antonio Salazar, a prominent Portuguese statesman and economist, was a central figure in shaping Portugal's trajectory during a transformative era. Born on April 28, 1889, to a family of modest income, Salazar's early life was marked by academic brilliance and an inclination toward economics. He pursued higher education at the University of Coimbra, eventually becoming a professor of political economy at the same institution. Salazar's ascent to power was driven by the tumultuous political landscape of Portugal. Following the collapse of the monarchy and the instability of the First Republic, Portugal was mired in uncertainty. This environment set the stage for Salazar's influence. With the support of key military figures, he was appointed as the Minister of Finance in 1928, tasked with restoring Portugal's shattered economy. Salazar's economic expertise quickly became evident as he implemented direct state intervention and initiated policies that aimed to achieve financial stability and budgetary equilibrium. His ability to navigate these economic challenges propelled him into a more prominent role in the government, He also garnered support for his conservative ideologies and his opposition to extreme political factions. In 1933, Salazar's influence culminated in the establishment of the Estado Novo, a corporatist authoritarian regime. This new political order was formalized through the Constitution of 1933, which solidified Salazar's position as the Prime Minister. The Estado Novo aimed to centralize power, suppress dissent, and control the nation's direction under Salazar's leadership. One of the notable features of the Estado Novo was its use of repression to silence opposition. Salazar's regime utilized the international and state defense police to suppress dissenting voices and maintain strict control over public discourse. Censorship, arrests, and intimidation tactics were employed to ensure conformity with the regime's ideologies. Salazar's dismissal from power came as a result of health issues. In 1968, he suffered a stroke that left him incapacitated. Marcello Caetano, who had been a key figure in Salazar's government, succeeded him as Prime Minister. However, under Caetano's leadership, discontent with the regime grew, fueled by a desire for greater political freedom and modernization. Amid mounting pressure for change, the Carnation Revolution of April 25, 1974, marked the end of the Estado Novo regime.
Okay, so that's all I'm going to play for today so that, I'm going to continue these conversations, but we're going to have to really dive into it, which I don't mind doing because when we're talking about Estado Novo, that's one thing, right? That extends not just through Portugal, but through the colonies, which includes Africa, but it also extended to Brazil, South America in general as a whole, right? Latin America. So that influence is huge and it matters especially in America because as I pointed out earlier, many of these processes are not separate from one another, nor are they different. They're just called by a different name. It's an authoritarian regime. And when you look at the United States in particular, you can see the Salazar influence not only in the way that they practice bureaucracy, but also in who is managing the country. In the Department of Interior, you have Ken Salazar, which was made famous by the lawsuit Cobell versus Salazar. Let me pull that up really quickly because it's relevant. But Ken Salazar also has a brother, John Salazar, and John Salazar is made famous. He's known for the Stolen Valor Act, which, says a lot in itself. I haven't done a lot into that because I understand that once you're military, you are expected to be contained within the military order. And they're saying, with the Stolen Valor Act is saying that people cannot pretend to be military who are not. But the military coming out of this time frame is not going to be viewed as honorable as they have made it seem, because when you break down history, you can see the influence of fascism, of Nazism, the after wartime period, and that didn't just disappear, it didn't just dissolve, it got absorbed into governments. And so the Cobell versus Salazar Indian Trust. Now, this is Cobell versus Ken Salazar because he was Department of Interior, right? He was managing the trust funds in the 5 civilized tribes. So this isn't, this is specifically for the 5 civilized tribes, the Blackfeet. I just think that's so ridiculous. And I did show this this particular Wikipedia on a previous live stream. I believe I did. But this is where you get the Dawes Act, this is where you get the Dawes Roll, this is where you get a simulation, so on and so forth. Right? So I'm not going to go too much into that because I did bring this up previously. But I do want to mention that why the Salazar regime, and I'm talking about Estado Novo now, what we were just watching, the Portuguese regime, is because the Salazar name appears in cases about trust management, colonial beneficiaries, government as a fiduciary, which treats people as incapable of self-government. So this is wards of the state. So it's the same exact practice of the dictatorship of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in Portugal, Estado Novo. And I think it's very important for people to study this, especially if you're interested in American history, because it never disappeared. It was reorganized through trust corporations and administrative law. That's why I say that you are being oppressed by bureaucracy. It is the administration of the law. Your federal government has no jurisdiction over you unless you give it jurisdiction over you. That's the only way it does. And you give it jurisdiction when you sign up, when you register, when you assimilate, when you allow them to classify you as something that you are not naturally classified as. You have a name. You should have a name, and it should not be Pop Deuce. You should have a husband. You should have a head of household.